Okay, hello and welcome to another Tokyo College webinar. I'm Trent Brown. I'm one of the researchers based here at Tokyo College, and it's my pleasure to introduce today Professor Catherine Tucker. She's currently one of our visiting professors here. So Professor Tucker holds a joint appointment at the Center for Latin American Studies and the Department of Anthropology at the University of Florida in the United States. Her research focuses on the impact of collective action and different types of governance structures on the sustainability of resource management practices. Empirically, her main focus is on rural and indigenous communities in Central America. Today, she's going to be talking to us about coffee, including the challenges faced by coffee producers, issues with the sustainability of coffee production systems, and how coffee producers engage with fair trade certification regimes. If you'd like to read more about Professor Tucker's perspectives on coffee, you might want to have a look at her 2017 book, Coffee Culture, Local Experiences, Global Connections. Also joining us today is Associate Professor Hiroe Ishihara from the Graduate School of Frontier Sciences here at the University of Tokyo. Her research examines a range of topics related to the cultural aspects of natural resource management, including on how ecosystem services assessment systems relate to diverse human values. And she'll be offering her reflections on Professor Tucker's talk a little later on. Now, before I hand it over to Professor Tucker, I'd just like to say that you can submit your questions to the speakers at any time using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. We'll have time for you to pose your questions to either Professor Tucker or Professor Ishihara at the end of today's session. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Professor Tucker.
Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be here. Okay, sorry, I couldn't tell. I am really pleased to be at Tokyo College. It's a really rewarding and enriching experience. And I want to say thank you to everyone here and especially to the event team for getting this started. And now I will move to start the presentation. All right, okay. So today I'm going to be talking about some of my work with coffee producers and cooperatives. They're facing a lot of challenges, and this work reflects some ongoing efforts that I'm making to try to understand how they are dealing with the many challenges that they are facing. So the grand conundrum of coffee refers to the fact that coffee is one of the most valuable commodities and one of the most traded commodities in the world. It's enriched the coffers of the world's colonial powers and still continues to enrich corporations today. And there are only certain ones that play major roles in its commerce and sales, but there are many smaller players who are making important efforts to try to contribute towards sustainability and a more equitable system. The conundrum itself is that coffee production depends upon people willing to work for next to nothing. Meanwhile, those who buy and roast and sell coffee tend to make the large share of the profits. Only 6 transnational companies purchase over 60% of the world's green unroasted coffee, and their profits have been growing. Meanwhile, producer incomes today have fallen. They get about 3 cents or about 2 cents or 3 yen per cup of coffee. So this is in great contrast to what people may perceive as coffee consumers. Indeed, lack of understanding about coffee producer situations is one of the challenges that is faced in coffee markets. Millions of people consume coffee regularly, However, they don't understand the roots of its origins or the market itself. Now, Japan is the world's fourth largest consumer of coffee in the whole world, with a almost 3.9 kilos per capita of consumption per year. This seems like a lot, but Northern Europe and Canada have by far led the world in their per capita consumption of coffee. In Finland, they consume about 12 kilos of coffee a year per person, and adults typically drink more than 4 cups of coffee a day. That seems like a lot, but if you consider how dark and cold and long the winters are, perhaps that makes sense. However, we do have in Asia the example of Hong Kong, which in the past few years has increased its per capita consumption of coffee to rival Finland, the largest consumer. And so it's not just about things being cold and dark in the winter. The US is the world's largest overall consumer of coffee, but its per capita consumption is not much different from Japan's. So in this context, what's happening for coffee producers? Because clearly there's a lot of people who are very willing to drink a lot of coffee. They're facing coffee price volatility. They're facing climate change. And climate change is associated with lower production and also lower quality of coffee. Environmental deterioration is a large problem, often because of poor practices by poor agriculturalists who lack resources, or because of industrial agriculture, which is destroying the environment without taking efforts to maintain it. These are happening all over the world. Climate change itself is closely linked to the spread of coffee diseases and pests. We also have rising cost of inputs. This is also linked to higher costs in general because of climate change causing damage to resources and to crops. And these are happening in contexts of global market transformations, declining profits for farmers in particular. And in Honduras and some other places, there's increasing labor scarcity and political uncertainty. And these are often related to structural and overt violence that is affecting coffee producers and entire countries that have a long history of historical challenges and inequities and unbalanced power relations. So when all of these things interact, we see that farmers who try to produce coffee are facing a number of very challenging contexts, and they are multiple, and they are sometimes aggregated and multiplicative. So my work then here is going to focus on a couple of research questions. How are small-scale coffee producers in Latin America facing and coping with major socioeconomic and environmental challenges? In particular, do certifications, including fair trade, help these producers to mitigate climate change, to gain better, more stable coffee prices, improve equity and well-being, and move toward greater economic, environmental, and social sustainability? This is a large topic and a huge challenge, and other researchers have found mixed results. My theoretical information, which I'm going to breeze by in interest of time, are grounded in political ecology and social ecological systems frameworks. I hypothesize that arrangements that support transitions toward greater sustainability and equity will benefit the resilience of the systems and producer well-being. This is something I have found very difficult to ascertain or to measure. It will take more time, and this is a longitudinal project. I will focus more on this question in terms of certifications because my work is now finding some patterns as I look at the outcomes of certifications. But the underlying problem is that there is high uncertainty as to whether any efforts towards sustainability and equity are going to be successful in the long term, given the current context of the world's global economic system and rapid global climate change. I do want to take a quick look at the social ecological systems framework. It has a lot of interaction with political ecology. I will note that political ecology pays a particular attention to social relations in their a way that they influence resource use, social marginality, and environmental transformations. It particularly pays attention to power relations. By contrast, the social ecological systems framework looks more systematically at how governance interacts with resource systems, resource units, which are animals and living things in systems, and the users, and looks at the processual and dynamic ways that all of these interact and how they lead to outcomes. This is complementary, but more structured, and I find it very useful in conjunction with political ecology. My methods have been primarily ethnographic. These include interviews, surveys, focus groups, and searching through records, documents, and maps. As part of my work, I have hired local high school and university students so that they also get to work on these projects and learn from them. Many of them are actually sons and daughters of coffee producers. And I've also worked with 2 experienced Honduran scientists now for actually almost 20 years. So this work builds on prior findings from a multinational collaborative project in Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, and Costa Rica. I know that this graph is too small to read for you. The important point here is that each one of those bars represents a different kind of adaptation that the 1,277 coffee-producing households indicated. And each of the 8 towns across 4 countries showed a different pattern. This showed us that farmers are proactive, creative, and trying very hard to find a way to adapt and be successful in the number of challenges that they are facing. This research also pointed out, as we talked to people, a great deal of interest in certifications, particularly in Fair Trade International, because they saw it as a possibility to support a more secure livelihood, get a handle on market volatility, assist with their local funding priorities and priorities for local projects, and to increase their resilience to climate change. So, in the stage of research that I am going to be sharing with you now, I selected a set of representative coffee enterprises from Western Honduras that represented the range of variability that existed in the area. And I was already aware of some of these groups and how they were attempting to adapt to the severe weather events and their efforts with certifications. This is the area that I work in, and each of those red dots represents one of the producer organizations. The point marked COMSA is an example I will be talking about in more detail. All of these producer organizations lie in Mesoamerica's dry corridor, which throughout history has experienced extended severe droughts. It's also perhaps one reason the Mayan civilization fell. They have been experiencing worsening droughts in the past 20 years. Very briefly, the characteristics of the sample of the 12 producer organizations are there are 7 cooperatives, 4 associations, and 1 collective mercantile business. They range in size from 28 to almost 1,700 members. The range in area of coffee planted per farmer is from 0.2 of a hectare to 50 hectares, with a median of about 2 hectares. The organizations vary from no certifications in the present to 12. And the range of elevation is 800 to 1,800 meters above sea level. This means that almost all of the farms are located in what is considered the optimal range for high-quality coffee production in Central America. Almost all of it is shade grown. They are all planting a mix of disease-resistant and heirloom variety coffees, which allows them to balance disease resistance with varieties that are known for their flavor. They use multiple forms of processing, which allows them to attract different kinds of buyers in the market. And they range in what they sell from very small specialty micro lots to bulk containers. Thinking a little bit more about certifications in Honduras, top quality coffee is increasingly recognized as coming from Honduras. It's also now the 4th or 5th largest producer of coffee in the world. For farming groups to obtain certifications, they need to be a part of a group. This relates to economies of scale, because a small farmer is never going to fill a container, and most buyers want at least a container of coffee in order to have a contract. By being parts of organizations, farmers can gain access to technical assistance, market information, and credit, as well as logistical support and national programs that will aid in getting certifications. Certifications promise better prices, but they do not guarantee them. And they carry costs for farmers and their organizations. And the big problem, which I will return to at the end, is that relatively few buyers are willing to pay higher costs or higher prices for certifications. And that means that there's more certified coffee available than there are buyers who are willing to pay the price. This gap between supply and demand is one of the largest challenges. Here are just some of the major certifications that were reported by these certified producer organizations in the sample. I will talk a little bit more about Fairtrade International, which was the largest and most frequently reported certification. First of all, and very briefly, I think maybe most of you in the audience know that fair trade is an international movement. It aspires to create more equitable and a more fair world. It seeks to assure in particular that farmers and producers work in safe conditions, get a fair wage, and are treated fairly in general. It's only one, Fairtrade International is just one of a number of fair trade labels, but it is the largest, and it is the only one that provides a social premium, which is an additional 10% paid to all the certified cooperatives that sell fair trade coffee. That's the key. They actually have to sell it to a fair trade buyer willing to pay the price. And farmers can do a lot with that extra 10%. In Honduras, this social premium and the minimum price that Fairtrade International guarantees are its major appeal. So in general, certifications, not just Fairtrade International, are trying to improve quality, environmentally friendly practices, and support greater equity. In addition, the environmental components which Fairtrade International also supports are things like shade management, which can mitigate high temperature and wind damage, shaded plantations, which support biological diversity, and also can prevent landslides and mitigate soil erosions. However, these steps have little to no impact on things like the damage caused by severe climate change related events. So I will move now to an example of one of the most successful producer organizations in this sample. Café Orgánico de Marcala, Sociedad Anónima, known as COMSA, has a unique philosophy. It goes by the 5 M's, which it developed. And I know it's not M's in Japanese, but it's organic matter, minerals, mountain microorganisms, living molecules, and gray matter, the mind. They are also unique in that they have a very strong program to reduce imports and try to produce everything they can. They save a lot of money by not paying for imports. They have experimentation, produce their fertilizer and organic treatments, and have an active carbon footprint project supported by a direct trade organization, which pays a premium to carbon neutral farms. COMSA has 9 certifications, including Fairtrade International. Their Fair Trade Social Premium for the 2020-21 season was over $2 million US. During annual meetings, they decide how they're going to spend it. They make the decision by majority vote. Every member also receives a part of the premium toward their own needs. Over the past 10 years, COMSA has paid an average of $4 per pound of organic coffee, while market prices have varied between 2 to 3 pounds for organic coffee and much less for conventional coffee. Their projects using the social premium include the COMSA International School, which now goes from preschool through high school. They have 182 students, which is all they can manage. Most of them are sons and daughters of coffee producers, and they don't pay anything for the school. They also provide training to all of their members in sustainable agriculture, and they offer a certification in organic agriculture and nutritional education, which anyone who's interested can take. They offer a microcredit bank for members. They've been funding a cupping laboratory. They have a gender equity initiative and an amazing health and hygiene initiative to promote the circular economy to waste nothing. They have a remarkable solid waste recycling, and they also burn all the toxic waste and capture the toxic waste in special filters, which is one thing that they have to import. So COMSA is an example that has been very successful, particularly in how it's used its social premium to benefit the entire community. As we turn now to the results across the sample, we can see that not all cooperatives or members of the sample were as successful. Since 2018, 2 of the smaller co-ops have stopped renewing certifications. Their costs exceeded their benefits. They were unable to build reliable, permanent relationships with buyers who were willing to pay more for quality coffee. 3 larger of the organizations, including COMSA, did get reliable fair trade and direct trade buyers and were able to sell almost all of their coffee at higher prices. For those with fair trade buyers and social premiums, these organizations reported improvement in general social outcomes, and they perceived improved equity, health, and education. Most of the organizations had mixed outcomes. They had some benefits, but also some challenges, the most common being, even if they had some reliable buyers, they were not able to sell all of their certified coffee at a better price. And regardless of these outcomes, all of the organizations in the sample, particularly since the end of the pandemic, were experiencing worsening issues with climatic variability and outmigration of youth. In particular, Hurricanes Eta and Iota in October and November of 2022 caused immense damage across Honduras, and some of the roads and bridges have still not been repaired. I will move quickly now through some of the other outcomes. In terms of sustainability outcomes for certifications, it's very difficult to assess whether certifications are responsible for environmental outcomes. There are other things that also influence environmental outcomes, including the pre-existing values of the community, the amount of social solidarity in the community for working together on shared projects and making a commitment to things like not deforesting or practicing water efficiency and wastewater management. Economically, as I already mentioned, the co-ops that were able to find reliable buyers and sell most of their coffee at higher prices did report more economic stability and better prices. And they did appear to have stronger social capital. And that, in some ways, appears to be present for all of the cooperatives that have maintained certifications. Those that have maintained certifications, even with mixed outcomes, have done so because the entire membership has decided it's worth persisting, even if the benefits aren't yet what they hope. But it is very important to note that not only are there differences across organizations, there's also inequities within organizations, and some of them struggle with favoritism or inequitable distribution of access to certain resources. The agroecological outcomes, particularly for COMSA, are very promising. The reduction of agrochemical use saves money. Also, it's now been shown by experiments conducted by Honduras Coffee Institute that organic coffee has significantly higher cupping scores. So insofar as certifications and efforts to reduce agrochemicals are benefiting the environment, there's also motivation because they improve the outcomes for coffee. In general, organic treatments are also perceived as reducing exposure to toxic chemicals, particularly for workers who previously were administering these toxic chemicals in the farms. In particular, farmers said that they feel their children's health is safer and better. So there are good aspects, but all of the organizations reported high debt ratios. One co-op manager even said, "We've learned not to be afraid of debt." At that time, his level of debt was over twice their annual income. Yet, he felt it was necessary to maintain the level of quality and infrastructure that was demanded by buyers. Small indigenous descended co-ops, which included the two who gave up on certifications, were paying interest rates of up to 23% on multi-year debt. At that level, without taking out any more debt, their debt goes up every year. So for larger organizations that were getting multi-million dollar incomes, they were receiving much lower interest rates of about 10%. So debt is a problem, even if people say we aren't afraid of it. It's clear that size is an advantage. Larger organizations have economies of scale. They can more easily afford sophisticated equipment and storage facilities. They've been able to invest in water-efficient equipment and wastewater treatment. They've gained, more often than not, reliable buyers who are willing to pay social premiums and higher prices. They can offer more credit to their members. And they tend to get more certifications, which mean they can attract a various range of buyers, because some buyers want certain certifications and don't care about others. Nonetheless, some of the smaller co-ops and even some of the independent smallholder farmers that I got to know were selling some of the best coffee using traditional technologies. I'll mention one in particular who has never gone into debt because he doesn't believe in it. And every year he sells 100% of his crop to 2 buyers from Japan who are now considered to be members of the family. He attracted the first buyer because that buyer got lost looking for another cooperative. The coffee producer invited him in, tasted the coffee, and said, "I will take all that you have." And that has continued now for over 20 years. But out of the thousands now of producers who I have met, he's the only one who has that story. Looking to the future then, I think that a lot of these organizations and producers are betting on hope. They have a lot of motivations, differing resources, and differing options, but they persist. They're all facing these very severe challenges that I mentioned at the beginning of the talk. Yet, those who are still in this game of producing coffee, for all of you coffee lovers out there, have a remarkably positive outlook. They believe that in the future they will be able to gain better prices, secure livelihoods, and debt reduction. Those in the larger cooperatives have had years where they've seen evidence that that's possible. Many of them also have such deep commitment to their place, to their farm, to their history, that they don't perceive or really do not want to consider giving up. And overwhelmingly, they say, maybe next year will be better, and maybe the future will be better. That is, at the same time, competing with the reality that many of these farmers are older and many of their children have now left the country to work in other places, seeking a life that they hope will be more secure and less risky. So here's to all of the coffee producers out there that are persisting in the face of immense challenges. And they're making it possible for all of us to continue to drink coffee. And in honor of all of their efforts, I do whatever I can to try to buy fair trade, certified, organic coffee and pay the premium. because I know that ultimately some of that gets back to these farmers. And if more and more people were willing to do that, that might start to shift that balance. So thank you so much for your attention. And I'm now very happy to turn it over for some comments and then to your questions. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you so much for such an interesting presentation. Really interesting to look both at the mechanics of fair trade, but also some of the reasons why it is or isn't working at the ground level. We're going to now hand over to Professor Ishihara for her comments.
Okay, stop sharing. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Tucker, for your presentation. I really enjoyed it. So let me share my screen. So yes, so my name is Hiro Ishihara and I'm from Graduate School of Frontier Sciences. So, oops. Okay. So a little bit about my research. So I do not work on coffee or coffee fair trade certification, but in terms of, I love coffee, but I'm very heavily addicted to coffee, but I do work on seafood certification schemes, and I specifically work on Japanese producers who have got certification schemes in Japan. So my research basically worked on why seafood certification schemes are spreading in Japan, despite the fact that there is no sourcing code. So usually in EU or US markets, supermarket requires the seafood producers to have certification scheme, but that is not the case in Japan. At the same time, there is no price premium for seafood certification. So to me, there's no motivation for seafood producers to get certification. But despite that, there are seafood producers who have gained MSC or ASC certification, which is MSC is the Marine Stewardship Council. They have headquarters in London, and ASC is the Aquaculture Stewardship Council. It's both of them are global certification, and they tend to be quite expensive if you would like to apply for certification scheme in Japan. So, so I looked into it and I've interviewed most of the producers who have got certification scheme. The key things that I found was that, so in terms of economic motivation, they do not get price premium. However, they use it for their branding strategy. So by getting a certification, they want to differentiate the seafood product from other products. So for them, getting the first ASC certification in Japan or MSC certification was very important. For example, with non-fed aquaculture like oyster, if you don't feed them, you can go either for ASC or MSC. So this poster is from Minami Sanriku. So they are the first ones who got oyster ASC certification for oyster. There was another producer who applied for, he specifically said that we didn't want to go for ASC because we will not be the first one. So they went for MSC. So that's how it's been used. The other part is that if they get ASC or MSC certification, there are some supermarkets who are pledging that they want to have sustainable seafood. So they will get they will get a stable deal with some of the big supermarkets. So those are the main economic motivation. However, looking at these motivation, it came to me that the certification product will not be the predominant product in Japan. Because if it is the branding, if everyone gets certified, there's no reason for getting the certification anymore, right? So it needs to be a small portion. The other part is that because these supermarket like Eon, they will buy certified product. But the thing is, because they're not paying a price premium, what they do is that if the producer get like 1% of their product certified by MSC or ASC, they're willing to buy uncertified product from that producer. So my prediction is that MSC or ASC certification will not be prevalent or dominant in Japan. So I am looking for alternative issue. But what was interesting was that through the interview, what I found was that non-economic motivations are also very important. This is a poster that I found in Minami Sanriku to promote the certified oyster, but it says passing on the future generation, delicious oyster and ocean of my hometown, Minami Sanriku. So it just shows that it's more like a commitment to the local areas, and it's kind of, they're using it as a kind of promoting the local pride. So as Professor Tucker said, it's the, commitment to the place and sense of community. Those are the things that are kind of motivation, not just for economic, but there are non-economic motivation for it. So these are my research, so I would skip on this one. But so the comment, I have 3 comments for Catherine. So the first one is that, so there's a consensus within the literature on certification scheme that price premium often doesn't trickle down to the producers. I've looked into many studies. One thing is that often they don't, certification doesn't guarantee fixed price premium. In some cases, like I think in cacao, they do have price premium, but because of the long supply chain, often the price premium doesn't trickle down to the producers. The other part is that because they go for certification and they need to meet standard, the cost of production often goes up. And on top of it, there's like audit fees that they need to pay to the certification body and so forth. So often the cost of implementing eco-friendly practice as well as audit fee exceed the benefit of certification scheme. For example, like one of the aquaculture farmers that I interviewed, they said that they are able to sell the aquaculture product with like 1.5 the price of the conventional production. But because the cost is twice, so there's no benefit or there's no profit to them. So why do you think there was a success in COMSA's case? Is it like direct payment, or is social premium guaranteed on top of price premium? I don't quite understand how it's been structured. So that's one of the key things that I wanted to ask you. And the second point is that I find it really interesting how they distribute the price premium and social premium, because on one hand, they do distribute to the individual household, right? But at the same time, they do community project like building schools, training, and healthcare. So, and I think that really goes against the neoliberal discourse of certification scheme, because like the discourse of certification scheme is like, creating a differentiated product by putting an eco label and allowing the consumer to pay the price premium for sustainability. And this will send a market signal towards the producers. So like in this discourse, I think the individual payment is the critical issue to uphold the certification scheme. But what you're describing is that a different way that certification scheme function. And I would like to know how it's functioning and yeah, and in terms of like, especially I find it quite interesting how the price premium or the benefit of certification being distributed, because even within like things like payment for ecosystem service, there are trends that is going not to pay the payment to individual, but at the community level. So do you think that's one of the key to success in terms of designing a collective distribution mechanism? And yeah, so that's my second question or comment. The other thing is that because I am looking into alternative to certification scheme, to me, the critical problem with certification scheme is that they have a standard and it's a global standard, right? But then at the local level, in terms of the practice, agricultural or fishing practice, it's diverse. And it's always the issue with that is that when they want to get certified, they need to meet this global standard. But then the local practice, it may be sustainable or at least, ecologically and socially sustainable. It's like the balance that they make. And it's quite difficult to be like, accepted or recognized by global standard. And sometimes I find that there is like a kind of epistemic injustice in terms of imposing that kind of global standard to the local practice. And so, but then at the same time with like product like coffee, which is a global product, it goes through the global supply chain. So I understand the need for global standard, but I feel a little bit conflicting situation where how we can really accept, these local sustainable practice at the global market. How can we do that? And there are ways that are happening in Japan, like locally produced and locally consumed, Chisan Chisho and so forth. But those initiatives or schemes tend to be at the very local scale, and it's quite difficult to scale up to like a global supply chain like coffee or seafood. So how do you, foresee that kind of situation, and what is your recommendation, or what do you think about the situation as a whole? That's it from my side.
Thanks for those wonderful comments. And I hope this is the beginning of a longer conversation, because it needs a longer conversation. So in response to your questions, I think that there are important differences across certification schemes. And I focus on Fair Trade International because it is actually a different approach. A lot of the challenges of that particular certification are related to the fact that it tries very hard not to operate purely on a profit motive. Okay. All right. Mm-hmm. So it does this in three main ways. One, by requiring that all of the certified organizations are owned by the members and that decisions are made equally and benefits are proportional to participation. In other words, if you sell 1 pound of coffee, you don't get as much as if you sell 100 pounds of your coffee to the organization, but everyone gets the same price as long as the criteria are met. And the other thing is that it has a floor price for conventional and for organic coffee. In most years, that works in its favor. In about 4 out of every 5 years, the fair trade price for conventional and organic coffee is higher than the market price. This is why it's hard to find buyers willing to pay from the beginning a higher price. It's not determined by who's selling it at the end. What producers get is guaranteed from the beginning. That builds in a payment directly to each producer. And the way the successful co-ops all work is that each person, each farmer who sells their fair trade certified coffee gets that price per pound in that amount of coffee. So that's even Steven. Mm-hmm. And so that's the first thing that's different. We need to acknowledge that by the time that fair trade coffee gets to the end seller and consumer, that price may be jacked up quite a bit beyond,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
Because you have to cover expert cost, transportation costs, roasting costs, packaging costs, and often delivery costs. And if you're selling in a coffee shop, you're also going to be covering all of the costs of that shop and the workers. Okay, so there's a huge difference, but there's also reasons for it. But the bottom line is that the problem is that there aren't enough buyers willing to pay above the market price.
So what happens to the ones that were not possible? The ones that
All the
couldn't sell?
coffee, that doesn't have a buyer ends up being sold at conventional prices. And that's why a lot the cooperatives left the certifications. Okay. All the other certifications, except for Fair Trade International, the price is negotiated. All right. Okay. So can I continue or do I need to wrap up? Okay. Why success in COMSA? Partly because they got buyers. Part of it is luck. I will tell the story because it is another absolutely remarkable story. In the United States, you may not know about the Super Bowl, which is the most expensive advertising market of the year, and most of the country sits down to watch two teams of grown men chase a little ball around and bash each other. Excuse me for characterizing that way if there's any American football fans out there. So, in order to show the organization's commitment to social justice, they offer on lottery 1/32 advertisement. And in 2017, the winner was a small fair trade coffee roaster, and COMSA was featured very prominently in his advertisement. And the next day, COMSA's phone blew up. And since then, they have not had trouble selling all of their quality coffee. So another example of luck that's unusual, but they kept the relationships, they produced good coffee, and they maintained good relationships with their members. And they invest that social premium in the whole community. But I also think they made really wise decisions in reducing imports and not buying agrochemicals, which cost a fortune and have just been getting more and more expensive. And alternatives to certification schemes, I would like to come back to that because there are so many details out there. I do, however, want to point out one caveat about coffee. Certified or not, buyers will not buy coffee unless it meets their cupping standards. Cupping is a global reference that is standardized by very rigorous testing. Of course, individuals can vary a bit, but all tests are done by multiple cuppers. So they self-verify. I'm going to study cuppers in a future project. So that runs counter to this idea that only certain kinds of people can benefit from good prices. Okay, so there's this whole standard, and certified or not, if you've got good coffee, you can probably get a better price. People who buy certified coffee often do that to reduce the costs of repeated cupping. Because certification is kind of a bit of a substitute for that.
So there's another way of quality control.
And anyone can do it if they can produce quality coffee.
Did you have any response to that, or should we go to questions from the audience?
Yeah, shall we go for that?
Okay,
Yeah.
sure. We've had a few interesting questions submitted. Perhaps we'll start with the one that maybe sounds simple, but perhaps opens up a complex discussion, which is, are there any issues with greenwashing related to coffee certification?
Yes. So greenwashing is very difficult on the side of cooperatives. Certifications, although reputable, well-known ones, are verified every year with on-the-ground auditing. This is something that costs money. It's one of the things that makes certifications transparent and reliable to buyers and challenging for producer organizations. However, what happens after that certified coffee leaves the processing plant, it can be a big challenge. One thing that happens is that because of the shortage of fair trade buyers, you can have buyers who may claim their coffee is certified, but they didn't pay the certified price. That's a no-no, but it can be really difficult to control. Most coffee producers in certification are supposed to follow chain of custody principles, right? There is usually a high degree of confidence, but sometimes things can happen. It may not always be on purpose. Most of the time, chain of custody works really well. There's lots of like little places, interstitials in the system where there can be problems. But from my perspective, the true problem with greenwashing in coffee comes with all of the really large coffee roasters who sell natural coffee. They slap a picture of a farmer on it who knows if they actually have a relationship with that farmer, and then they sell it as if it were certified. Another whole organization that I consider to be a greenwasher is Fairtrade USA, which was expulsed from Fairtrade International because they decided that in order to say they were fair trade, all that members had to do was pay them $2,000. And they can have as little as 10% fair trade in what they sell of coffee. That to me is greenwashing. It's something Fairtrade USA, thought was good for business and good for elevating the profile of fair trade. Really worked against them. So there's all kinds of this, and I suppose in other countries too.
Professor Ishihara, do you see issues with greenwashing in fisheries as well?
Greenwashing. No, I think like once it's certified, no, because basically you need to have chain of custody, and then the traceability, you need to follow the traceability rules as well. But I think the problem is that, like, at least in seafood, I think globally, only 10% from world capture is certified. So, and I don't think everything will be certified. Yeah.
It's that issue with having a sort of dual market. Okay, we have another question that speaks to perhaps the different motives for buying fair trade. So the questioner asks whether you see differences in motives from buyers across different countries. Are there also, for instance, small coffee shops that seek to buy fair trade? Do you see many buyers that like to come in person to forge a good relationship with a local farmer? Are motivations for buyers to get fair trade, and so on, usually related to customer demand, social pressures, business motives, or more on a personal level of wanting to contribute their share to fairness or to help local farmers be part of a story and help it make it feel personal. I might also piggyback on that question if I can with a question of my own, which is what is the trajectory in demand over time? Like you mentioned that there's this issue with price fluctuations in the coffee market. I would have expected that perhaps in fair trade, those fluctuations would be even greater. I mean, maybe after people have listened to your talk, they might go out and want to buy fair trade, and then, you know, by next year or however long it takes to forget what they've heard today, maybe go back to buying based on price and quality. But what does the data say about that? What's the trajectory in fair trade demand over time?
Okay, let's see if I have all the questions straight and go through them. So the first question, reasons for buying fair trade among buyers, there are several. Most buyers willing to pay fair trade price are committed to it out of social and ethical principles. Sometimes, if they're working for a larger company, that gets mixed in with things like wanting to look good, you know. Also, certifications can stand for different kinds of quality and commitments. And certain buyers have a customer base that they know wants to buy coffee with those kinds of certified characteristics. A big one is environmental sustainability and environmentally friendly practices. Really, the only way you can assure that is with a certification. And Rainforest Alliance is the kind of like the big one in that game. In terms of like smaller traders and roasters, are there any that go and directly have relationships with coffee producers? Yes, and thank God for them. Direct trade is the fastest growing portion of the market for coffee for specialty quality certified coffee. And one reason is because there are ethically committed coffee roasters and small independent coffee shop owners that are doing it not just because they love coffee, but because they hope in a small way they can make a difference in the world by being sure that the people who are growing the coffee that they sell are able to have a decent life. And direct traders that I know invest deeply in relationships with just a few cooperatives. And they maintain them. They visit every year. I mentioned the 2 Japanese buyers for the one farmer in Honduras. Those are direct traders. And his coffee, by the way, isn't certified because it depends on the cupping, right? So a lot of small traders are doing their own cupping. And in fact, a number of the small traders I know pay above the fair trade minimum because they can still make a profit paying more. A great example is Co-op Coffees, which runs the carbon sequestration project with COMSA. So direct trade is not necessarily for certification, but they often buy certified coffee, and the good folks, the truly ethically motivated people, can usually make money if they have a good business going, and they can pay even more. So what's the trajectory? Fair trade coffee has been more or less stable in terms of the demand. You have these other outlets like direct trade that are selling coffee too. But fair trade prices don't fluctuate, not very much, partly because of the floor price, if it's Fair Trade International, but also because of the competition for buyers. Because if they're willing to pay, maybe they aren't Fair Trade International, but they're a certification. They believe in paying more for certifications. So they pay more, but there's only so much more they're going to pay. But if they don't offer something, a lot of the really reputable cooperatives are going to say, sorry, we can find another buyer. Goodbye.
Right. There's a question that links that to sort of contemporary issues. A question submitted in Japanese, but the translation is, as symbolized by the fact that the price of Arabica coffee on the New York market exceeded $4 in February this year, the import price of green coffee beans in Japan has been rising sharply in recent years. Even in actual trading. How is the current situation of rising coffee prices that exceed the premium price set by each certification level affecting the social activities of producers?
So social, yeah.
First, I'd like to point out that it's a really unusual couple of years in coffee markets, and the prices have gone above the fair trade floor price. And in the past 10 months, the prices have gone above anything dreamt of in wildest dreams. And the reason is because of severe weather events in Brazil and Vietnam, which together are number 1 and 2 in world coffee production. And across Latin America and parts of Africa, there's been a combination of torrential rainfall and drought, which has further impacted the harvests. So the last year experienced something that is almost novel in the past 2 decades of coffee, which is an overall reduction in global harvest in coffee, particularly affecting some of the best coffee. That's why prices have gone up. So they've gone up, but they've only benefited a small proportion of the farmers because so many have in fact had severe harvest damage. So how is the price affected? For those who got a better price, they're investing in improving their farm. Maybe they're buying a car that's newer than 25 years old. Maybe they're sending their child to college, doing some things that they might not dream of otherwise or would find very difficult. But most farmers are in a tougher position.
Okay, another question from the audience. I have a question about the outmigration of younger generations. I wonder, what do you think will happen in the future if this pattern continues? How will it impact coffee production, certification systems, and global trade?
Another really important and complex question. I asked this question of a close friend who buys coffee and is also a fair trade buyer who's very committed to trying to improve the lives of coffee producers and especially small cooperatives. And she thinks 2 things are going to happen. One is that this opens the door wide open to industrial coffee production, particularly of Robusta coffee, which is much less fussy about the weather. And if it turns out that Robusta coffee is the coffee that is reliably being produced, most of us are going to get used to drinking bitter, dark, unflavorful Robusta coffee and think that's coffee. And the really elite, wealthy people in the world are going to monopolize all the good Arabicas.
I see. Right.
Didn't really answer the question. I'm sorry I didn't talk about labor, but labor is part of that, because if you don't have people who are available to pick fine Arabica by hand, it doesn't matter how industrial you want to get. Arabica coffee cannot be picked by machine without destroying the plant. Unless we go to robots, which I'm pretty sure are still going to be a lot more expensive and not as good as the average human. So labor is a really big deal. And that's another reason why we should all be willing to think about paying more for good coffee, because then labor could get paid more.
Right. Do you see a lot of youth out migration in the communities that you do your research in?
In some of the communities, I've heard that half the youth have left.
I think it's a story across the global south, really. Okay, we have a couple of questions from our colleague here at University of Tokyo, Marcin Jarzebski. So he asked first for Professor Ishihara. Thank you very much for your commentary. I have a follow-up question regarding farmers and fishers who are unable to enter certification schemes. In particular, how do small-scale fishers manage to survive in such a competitive environment? Given that supermarkets like Aeon require full supply chain documentation, it seems they would be excluded from such markets. I'd be interested in your thoughts. And we'll ask his questions to Professor Tucker after.
So I think the situation is that in Japan, Aeon or like Ito-Yokado, they don't specify the portion. For example, like in US, for example, like Walmart has made a declaration that I think by 2030, they want to have 100% of their seafood certified. They use different type of certification, but that's not the case in Japan. And I don't think that will happen. At least Aeon, I think they're planning to pledge for like 10 or 20%, but that's very low compared to EU market, especially northern part of Europe, for example, like in UK, Netherlands, Sweden, they pledge for 100%, but I don't think that's the case in Japan, and I don't think it will be.
I see, right. And then his questions for Professor Tucker. He says, thank you for your insightful presentation. I enjoyed it while having a cup of coffee. While I understand this may go slightly beyond your core research focus, it remains highly relevant. What do you think consumers in the global north what role do you think consumers in the global north can realistically play in supporting more climate resilient and equitable coffee systems? I'd be very interested to hear your reflections on consumer responsibility and influence in this context. Are there any critics of the certification system? And then he asks a second question, how do you conceptualize and measure social capital in your research with coffee producers? I'm curious about the methodological approach you take to assess this dimension. The methodological approach that you take to measure social capital in your research.
Thanks very much for that great question. I actually had a slide on what I think consumers can do. And I think the first and most important thing is always, learn about the product that you're interested in. And that isn't just for coffee. I think it's any certified coffee or any product about which is almost everything. There are reasonable concerns that the relationships of production are less than equitable. In terms of coffee, I know there are serious and valid critiques of certification. The critique that it just doesn't work is a vast oversimplification in the realities of the global market. The goal of fair trade and most certifications is fundamentally to try to transform global market relationships. That is incredibly difficult to do. And most of them sort of make this Faustian bargain that working within the market to make small changes is better than not trying at all, because it's impossible to actually sell things globally and export things without going by the rules and processes of the global shipping, trading, and export markets, which, ask any place you've ever been. There are very strict rules about importing any goods, but particularly agricultural goods. So, how do you transform a global market? Well, it takes more than some certifications. Insofar as they're able, certifications have certainly made some important differences for some communities, but I would be among the first to say, it's far from having changed the incidence of poverty or inequity in the world, right? But one reason is because consumers aren't willing to pay more for products. So if we wrap our heads around that, then I think that we can recognize that there's a certain complicity among all consumers. And it can be complicity out of raw necessity. That we need things to live, and these things are largely operated by global markets. Certifications and efforts by direct trades are efforts to change that, get around it, offer something different. But fundamentally, it can't work if people aren't willing to pay more for something that is trying to build a more equitable and environmentally sustainable world. So my thought, and I tell this to my students, is that think about what matters to you, and then try to find one product that you know and have reliable information on is actually doing a good job about making sure that the producers or the factory workers or the farmers are actually being fairly paid, and that a portion of what you spend goes directly back to that farmer. That does happen with Fair Trade International. I'm not saying it's a paragon of virtue, but it actually has a lot of rules in place to try to be sure that happens. And that's a first step. And that may be all anyone can do. But if everyone on the planet chose one thing that they were willing to pay more for and took the effort to find out that this actually pays more to the farmer, that would make the difference. And it might be enough to start changing the world. That at least is my idealistic trust.
Right. Well, as we're getting a little bit close to the end, I'm going to bundle two questions together. They're both somewhat certification skeptical, but maybe to different degrees. So the first one is, could growing reliance of smallholder coffee farmers on fair trade certification and buyers associated with fair trade create a new form of structural exploitation whereby producers lose bargaining power and become vulnerable to the terms set by certifiers and intermediaries? Have you observed such dynamics in your field research? So I guess to imply that fair trade becomes the new sort of middleman in a way. The second question is, I understand that most certification requires big investment and a long time before certification can be given. How are small-scale farmers able to cover the costs of this phase, especially in the case of failed attempts?
Two more great questions. So the theoretical foundations for the question about whether fair trade and dependence on it could actually become a sort of new extractive middleman if fair trade were actually able to grow to become a major player in the world, I would be concerned about that possibility. We are so far away from fair trade buying of certified fair trade goods and people willing to buy fair trade certified goods that I'm really not worried about that. I'm more worried that the venture will fail because there just aren't enough people at all buying it. And as I mentioned, there are already small cooperatives that have given it a shot, invested it, and just felt that mainly because they couldn't find a buyer willing to pay the fair trade prices after all of their immense investments, they just couldn't continue with it. So I don't think that's the real risk, but the theoretical foundations of that question are good. In terms of small scale farming, farmers covering the cost of environmentally friendly approaches in particular, that was the second one, right?
The question was about the long time it takes to get certified and how do farmers cope with that intermediary period when they're waiting to get certified.
When they fail.
And when they fail in particular.
To get the certification, yeah.
So certifications for coffee farming is done at the level of the organization. And usually organizations are able to get some kind of support to make that difference. But it does take a while to get certification. But the real cost of change happens when people try to move from conventional to organic coffee. That can mean a very significant increase in the price and the value of the coffee. But the amount of labor and time required is quite long, at least 5 years to convert. And even then, coffee bushes don't like to learn to go without chemical fertilizers. So in terms of, say, I'll put it this way, a lot of certifications allow conventionally grown coffee because environmentally friendly practices can occur without completely eliminating all agrochemicals. And so the time frame involved can more be things like filling out the paperwork in the application and getting the money to pay for the auditing and examination to make sure that farmers are following the rules. But I did want to mention that one of the really interesting things about the cooperatives that have pursued environmentally friendly types of certifications like Smithsonian Bird Friendly, Rainforest Alliance, is that many of them were already passive organic because they couldn't afford agrochemicals. And many of these were indigenous or indigenous descended farmers who already had highly biodiverse fields. In fact, I know of one cooperative that ended up abandoning Rainforest Alliance because Rainforest Alliance wanted different trees. And the farmers collectively said, look, we have been farming this land for something like 15,000 years. We know what grows. Get lost. So there's a lot of variability out there, and farmers hedge their bets and do what they can, but certifications do cost money.
I see. And perhaps we can end with a very practical question. A member of the audience asks, any good advice for small Japanese green tea producers to remain profitable and sustainable? So no pressure, but can you solve those problems?
I have no idea.
Can tea be certified through the same system?
Yes. Tea can certainly be certified by Fair Trade. They already have tea certified. Most of those cooperatives are in Africa.
I see.
Yeah. Kenya, South Africa. Oh, that's rooibos, not regular tea.
Mhm.
But I think that the quality of green tea here in Japan is fabulous. And, there's all kinds of ways to differentiate your product. And I will say that there's nothing like groups of people who share values working together to figure out strategies for mutual support and perhaps being able to create a unique logo in a market. It does take time, but it can be worth it. And then you aren't necessarily competing directly with everyone else. There could be 1,500 kinds of great, uniquely described and recognized green tea in Japan. And there's certainly enough drinkers that you might all find a market and be able to lift your price a little bit, especially if you can connect with all of the tea drinkers who would like to think that their green tea producers are living a good life and getting paid fairly.
Okay, well, I think that might be all that we have time for, so we might wrap up there. But yeah, Professor Tucker, thank you so much for your fascinating presentation. And if I may say also your optimism, it's nice to hear some, optimistic feeling about the potential of this. Thanks also to Professor Ishihara for your very thoughtful reflections and excellent questions. And thanks, of course, to the audience for joining. So we'll look forward to seeing you at our next webinar. Thank you.